Academics are all blackmailing each other all the time. Okay, to be fair, it's like a super mild kind of blackmail, and the general vibe is that people don't call each other out about this, but like if you're ignoring enough of the blackmailers, someone's gonna. So scholars are supposed to read all of the other work that's relevant to their research. And obviously that's impossible, but you're supposed to be trying. And if you've been clearly blowing off that responsibility enough, eventually someone's going to call you out on it. But that's not blackmail. It's not blackmail to call someone out for not doing their job. That's what's supposed to happen. Blackmail is when you... Oh, I'm not wearing my fucking tie. Blackmail means using the threat of revealing damaging or embarrassing information to coerce someone's behavior. Hi, I'm TX Watson. I'm the actor who plays TX Watson on YouTube, and I'm studying the shortcomings of academic communication. Because academic communication is, like, so busted, you guys. It's an emergency. And I mean emergency on like an academic timescale here, so like we need to be putting this fire out over the next 50 years, but if things go on the way that they've been going since the 1950s, there's no good reason to think that more than a handful of universities will survive this century. These videos are an experimental approach to rhetorical scholarship where I'm doing the formative thinking about my work in public as a weekly series. Last week's video was about why all of the sentences in academic papers ought to mean what the author was trying to get them to mean, and this week, God damn it, closing the blinds because it got sunny out and it's going to radically change the light balance in the scene throughout the whole video. It will, of course, still do that, but that should at least mitigate the damage. Last week's video was about why all of the sentences in scholarly papers ought to mean what the author was trying to get them to mean, and this week, for the scholars who have literacy down, we're talking about why you should care about the craft of writing. I believe that writers have a duty of care to our audiences. Now, what that means is an incredibly tricky question. Like, every writer is going to have their own feelings about what exactly we owe our readers, but when we write, when anyone writes anything, we're making something that is meant to affect the states of people's brains. Even if the effect you're going for is just they didn't know this thing before and they do now, the reader experiences what it's like to go from one of those states to the other, and I think that means you have an obligation to give a fuck about that experience. You may disagree that any such obligation exists. If you do, tune in next week because I got nothing for you today. But if you agree that it's a neglect of a moral duty to write something that you know people will have to read and put no effort at all into what that experience is going to be like, then I think you're going to see what I mean by academics are blackmailing each other. You may still think that's a ridiculous framing or even a dishonest one, but no accounting for taste. Because if you know other scholars are going to have to read your paper and you use that obligation to force them to excavate your meaning out of a mildly fibrous brain dump, you're blackmailing them into putting up with your shitty prose. You could also call it holding the information hostage. The point is, other publishing industries have a selective pressure that favors good prose because people can just ignore shit if it's badly written. Scholarly writing has that way less because you don't pick papers to read based on how they're written. You pick them based on what you have to read to stay current in your field. And in absence of an industry pressure, all that's left is the moral choice. You know some people are going to have to read your paper. Do you take care of them? Or do you make them eat shit? Look, there are absolutely scholars who just don't care about how the public feels about the academy, and I think they're assholes, but at least they're consistent. But there are loads of scholars who say that it's really important how we build relationships with the public, that it's important for the public to understand on a basic level how the academy works, that we need to be building partnerships with historically marginalized groups to give them access to the academy on their own terms. These things all affect what it's like to be a scholar in the world. Being alienated from the rest of society sucks, and there are many scholars who feel like their ability to do their job is impaired by public mistrust of the academy. Fucking medical communication papers with comments like, African Americans have this weird cultural mistrust of doctors for some reason. Like, bitch, I know you know about Tuskegee. You had to read about it when you did your IRB certification. And I've heard many of those scholars say that it is not the responsibility of scholars to write prose that respects the reader. The argument tends to go that communicating scholarship is a different job than doing scholarship, and there are different people who do that job. And like, part of what's going on here is that they've auto-corrected in their heads from the prose should be more readable to the prose should be targeted to non-experts, which I wouldn't blame them for. Except, their position is premised on the idea that scholars can correctly interpret nuanced claims even when they're expressed badly. So like, fair cop, I have not yet gotten very good at expressing these ideas, which I have only started to seriously pursue as a scholarly endeavor for a few months after being told for a year and a half that this isn't a real subject people can study. But that wouldn't matter if I weren't right. For a few summers in my early 20s, I worked for the food service at an amusement park near where I grew up, and I worked the same register every day for 8 to 10 hours a day, and right behind my register there was an ice machine. And people all over the restaurant needed ice, so there'd be people behind me getting buckets of ice all day, every day, and the ice machine had nothing to do with my job. It was not my job to get anyone ice. Yet still, after the first few weeks, I started insisting on filling the ice buckets for everyone. Even if I had a line, I'd turn around, fill the bucket, hand it off, and go back to the register. And this was for a few reasons. One, because them being behind me was an interruption anyway. Me doing it myself was a more complete interruption, but it was also a shorter interruption because, two, I was better at it than them because I got practice doing it like 10 times every day, as opposed to everybody else in the building doing it maybe once a day if they worked that often. Finally, and most importantly, I didn't spill ice everywhere. I was the only one who didn't spill ice everywhere. And I was the only one that mattered to, because if the people filling the ice buckets spilled ice everywhere, I'm the one who had to stand in a puddle for the rest of my shift. Sometimes something's not your job. It's not in your job description. It actually is someone else's job description. But you're the only person who's well positioned to be able to do it good enough to prevent the problems that happen when it's done badly. And you're the only person who suffers really specific and noticeable harm because it's being done badly. And the savings in discomfort and lost time you'd get by not having the problem are way bigger than the cost of just doing the thing that's not your job. So when I hear scholars who disagree with me about scholarly prose whining about the public thinking of the academy as exclusionary, hostile, out of touch, elitist, and incompetent, what I hear is, it's not my job to fill the ice bucket. Why are my socks wet? What my colleagues seem to keep missing when I tell them why scholars should care more about readability is that when you make a paper more readable for other scholars, that makes it more accessible to non-experts. And I said more accessible to non-experts. The word more is in that sentence on purpose. I agree completely with scholars who argue that scholarly papers are a different thing than news articles about the same research, and when I say that the papers should be written better, I don't mean they should be written more like news articles. It might sometimes sound like I mean that, because what I'm saying is that scholars should use basic skills in prose as a medium, and using skills to write better is way more of a journalism thing than a researcher thing. But the fact that certain major flaws are way more tolerated in one genre than another doesn't mean that both of those genres, executed to their highest potential, produce the same kind of finished work. The best research paper is still written for researchers. The fact that it'll be less hostile to the public is collateral. There are two things that go on when a person is reading. No, there is a shitload of things that go on when a person is reading, but there are two things that go on when a person is reading that I'm going to talk about right now. Comprehension and confidence. Comprehension is the thing we're typically worried about with scholarly papers. Does the reader understand what the writer said? And the standard perspective on this is that as long as the people who need this text professionally understand it, the writer has satisfied all obligations. But is the reader left feeling certain that what she thinks the writer said is what he meant to say? Complicated sentence structures, referencing other parts of the text without paraphrasing, and using jargon that's used in different ways by different scholars in closely related fields without clarifying which version of the word you're using. None of these things compromise the presence of information in the text. But the more stuff like that you've got going on, the more work it is for the reader to get your meaning. And the more work it is for the reader to get your meaning, the less confident she's going to be that she got it right. And when it comes to outsider readers, you're creating another problem, because even if your paper is strictly semantically accurate, there's still a lot more likely to come away with the wrong impression entirely. If you're asking a reader to hold 3, 4, 5 premises in their head at once, a less practiced reader might drop one of them, not realize they did that, come to the wrong conclusion, and not notice the difference. They didn't get it, but they don't know that. And a reader that lands on the wrong conclusion comes away thinking they know something that isn't true, with the authority of peer review and your reputation to back them up. And I know there are cases where making your point that densely is necessary. They are genuinely rarer than you think. It's even rarer than you think that it's helpful to ask an expert to read that way, rather than breaking it down into a few separate sentences so they can put the pieces together one or two at a time. Just because you know your reader is capable of comprehending a really complicated sentence doesn't mean those sentences aren't harder for that reader to follow. Like, Even if everybody in your house knows parkour, you should still put stairs in between the floors. Sometimes people are tired. If you do write clearly enough for your papers to be easy for other scholars to understand, a lot more often outsider readers will be able to confidently determine which part of the text they're not getting and, having reviewed it in full, confidently conclude that they don't get it. Writing like you give a fuck about how other scholars are going to experience your work has the added benefit that non-expert readers are a lot more likely to come away with an incomplete understanding rather than an incorrect one. That difference is really important. A reader who can see what it is that they don't understand comes away confident in their lack of understanding, which means they come away with a better idea of what they would need to learn if they wanted to understand it, and they come away better appreciating the value of the experts who do. Not to mention that on the occasions when a non-expert reader is equipped enough to be able to understand the paper if it's well written enough, they get to feel incredible. It's an amazing experience to know that your effortful pursuit of an interest has made you someone who can understand expert-level writing on that interest at least some of the time. It's a good idea for the Academy to be setting people up for that experience. More people would want to learn shit if the results were rewarding and fun. Meanwhile, the bad papers are out here manufacturing the opposite experience. Apart from people who get the wrong idea, there are people who read papers and know they don't get it but can't figure out why. And speaking extremely subjectively, I think this is the worst one. Do you know the feeling I'm talking about? Of not understanding and not even understanding why you don't understand. Of not comprehending what failure in you, what lack accounts for your incomprehension. For me, it's a really visceral feeling. It lives in the lungs and throat. Like my brain's trying to come up for air, and my body thinks it can't breathe while my head is still submerged. People don't like it when you do that to them. At best, it just hurts, and they learn not to look to scholars for answers anymore. At worst, they assign blame. You did it on purpose. You made it hurt to read this, because you don't want me to know what it says. I don't think there's any significant number of scholars who are trying to hurt their readers. Not consciously, at least, and not en masse. I don't have an argument for this. It has to be true for any of the shit I'm trying to do to work. If most scholars want non-expert readers to suffer when they try and read their work, there's no way the Academy is getting out of its present death spiral. And if it weren't true, what that would say about people... I don't think I'd have enough faith left in humanity to think anything could work. In which case, there'd be no right cause to throw my strength behind. The only thing to do would be kill the time until I'm dead. And delusionally fighting for the imaginary future of a version of humanity that loves each other is as good a way to do that as any. But there is still going to be scholars who are mad at me for bringing up the public at all, so let's live for a moment in the imaginary world where the only people who will ever see your paper are the people with a professional interest in it, okay? No one will ever read your paper unless doing so is part of their job. Anyone else who ever engages with the idea in it will engage with it through some other work. Do you need to care about reader confidence now? Do you need to care about ease of comprehension? Or by setting this filter, have we eliminated all possible situations in which confusion might occur? Well, let's see. A scholar in the same field studying the same thing on the same subject, that's probably fine. You're probably going to be great. A scholar in the same field working in a different subject, still pretty likely to be fine. Scholar in a different field but whose work intersects with yours. A little bit iffy here. They might get confused and resolve that confusion, but wonder if they would have resolved it differently if they had all of the field context that you have. Grad student. It's getting bad now. You're making the learning process harder for no reason. And you're causing a lot of unnecessary psychological distress because reading badly written papers makes you feel stupid, and every grad student is a little bit terrified that we're actually not smart enough to be here. Still, the grad student's probably going to get it right. So what about a specialist journalist who covers your field for a living? Better hope they're experienced. New person on the beat's probably going to fuck that up. How about a non-specialist journalist assigned to your research by their editor and working on a tight deadline? Yeah, you're fucked now. That article is definitely going to say you said things you didn't say, and per the initial conditions of our hypothetical, almost everybody who ever engages with your work is going to engage with that version, the one with the wrong shit in it. My years on Tumblr have made me sensitive to the risk of petty discourse, so I feel probably wrongly. Like someone's going to accuse me of victim blaming for saying that when journalists report badly on research, it's the researcher's fault for writing too poorly to be understood. But there's one person in this whole workflow who knows for sure what the paper is supposed to say. Everyone else's comprehension and confidence in that comprehension flows from how that person decides to write the paper. Writing well isn't our job. Why does the press keep getting people's research wrong? Filling ice buckets isn't my job. Why are my socks wet? I'm about to get my Patreon supporters scrolling by right here, which means we are about at the end of things, but stick around to the end of the video and I'll tell you the punchline to this joke. How many letters are there in the pirate alphabet? This is the very early days of a very long project, at least 3 more years of my PhD program, and I am planning on continuing to pursue academic reform activism as a career after I graduate. If I want to do those things, especially the second one, I need 2 things: stable funding and strategic freedom. Realistically, I'm not going to get either of those from an institution, but I'm definitely not going to get both that way. So I'm relying on you. And backing me on Patreon is not the only way to invest in the future of higher education. But like the average alumni donation is something like $400 a year. How much of that money do you think goes to flexibility and reform? If you've thought about donating to your alma mater, but you're worried they're going to spend the money polishing the grass on the football field, back me on Patreon for half what you would have sent them. It's way cheaper for you, way bigger relative impact for me, and it's just as much of a gamble on the future of the Academy, but at least I'm trying. There's a link to my Discord server in the description, and the day after posting these videos, we do a feedback session there, so if you have thoughts on the production, drop in. You should definitely like this video now, because if you change your mind later, you can always come back and unclick it, and the same goes for subscribing. Also, I'm racing my roommate, Astrid Lundberg, to 100K, and I am way behind, so please subscribe and also share this video with any friends you think would like this work. Thank you for watching. Follow the Patreon for free for updates, and check back in sometime next week for another video. I don't know when, because god damn, I had this video scripted on Saturday and it took me till Wednesday night to film. Sometimes the spirit of creative energy just leaves you and it takes some time to recover the ability to smile. And there are 10 letters in the pirate alphabet. I, R, and the 7 C's.